Welcome to another episode of Judgment Date. This is a particular program that we've been running now for some while, trying to help people through the problems of the lockdown. And what we've been trying to do is to look at questions of the economy, the legality, and indeed just the general medical problems that have posed, and try to help people through the uncertainties, which uncertainty we all have. I'm delighted this afternoon to welcome Colin Coleman, who is the ex-CEO of Goldman Sachs, Southern Africa, the Yale Fellow as well, and at the moment, and indeed, just about a week ago, gave a very, very interesting paper. It certainly prompted me to ask him to come and talk to me generally about these matters. A very interesting paper, the Vice Chancellor's lecture series, on many of the economic questions which have been bedeviling the country, and in particular the question of a basic income grant. So Colin, thank you very much for doing this. And I wonder whether I could start with asking you not so much about the basic income grant, which I'd like to spend time debating with you, but rather with the actual question of the broad economic proposals that you made, which you think could get us out of the mess we're in at the moment.
Well, thanks very much for having me on this program, Dennis, and it's an honor to be with you. So look, let's start from the beginning, which is, I think this is no normal times. This is a state of emergency in the economy in South Africa, where you've got effectively target unemployment for the end of this year, pro forma, with people who are going to be out of work at around 50%, including for those who are, going to give up looking for work. With that number 42% pre-COVID, so rising to 50%. That's a completely unsustainable situation. These are no normal times, and it's not normal anywhere in the world. So, when the UK government is providing subsidies for people in the form of vouchers to go to restaurants in London, one knows that this is not normal times. In South Africa, we don't have the means, but we have to do a bunch of things, which I summarize in a 10-point plan to get the economy started, to protect individuals and businesses, and to stimulate economic activity at this point in time. Having said that, I don't want people to think that it's a time to panic. I just think it's a time to take proactive measures, and I summarize those in the form of this 10-point plan.
Can I just ask you very briefly to give us the 10 points? And we can't talk about all of them, but I'd like to pick one or two up. I obviously know them, but many people listening to this don't. And part of my objective was to ensure that your paper actually got out to a broad audience. So, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. So I talk firstly about the introduction of a basic income grant that would be fiscally neutral, that would effectively get in the form of 140 billion rand per annum, a pool of capital in the hands of the most vulnerable. There's an argument between economists as to whether that should be 32 million adults, 23 who are economically active, or just the 10.8 million unemployed people, but that we'll leave to experts. But we can come back to that. I talk secondly about tax reforms, both in the form of tax credits, deductions, and various forms of reforms to fund that in a fiscally neutral way, and I've effectively demonstrate that it's possible without increasing corporate tax, without increasing personal tax or the VAT rate, to make modifications to the tax system, which I know you're the head of the tax commission, so you will have your own views on the viability and credibility of those proposals, but I have tested it with a number of tax experts. Thirdly, waging war on the legal economy in the form of assisting SARS and people fighting state capture to attack the illegal economy and get, both tax evasion focused on, and also corruption or wasteful expenditure that the Auditor General put at almost 100 billion rand for the last fiscal year that he reported on, and tackle that in a meaningful way. Fourthly, to provide urgent relief to businesses. The loan guarantee scheme has been only partially successful, and one thinks, and it's only been 100 of the 200 billion that's been allocated. So one is talking about looking at equity or hybrid equity or interest-free loans for the last 100 billion that hasn't yet been allocated. Talk about that to effectively give support to businesses who don't necessarily want to take on more debt, but do need support, fiscal support. Fifthly, assisting smaller micro enterprises, making up 11.5 million of the 16.5 million employed. So it's a very big and also unregulated environment. And I talk about ways of helping and facilitating the SMMEs, including subsidization or providing free internet, some infrastructure, and financing for SMMEs, which are the main blockages. The infrastructure project environment, which has really been the casualty of policy unclarity, whether it's been in the renewable space or a variety of forms of infrastructure, and looking at ways of unblocking that activity to get real private sector participation going. Seventh, creating an e-government platform, which is something of a hobby horse from Yale University, because, you know, in time, I think all of our public service is going to be experienced on a mobile phone platform that can effectively record, certify, and then apply for various services such as passports, you know, home affairs, tax itself, etc., and record. And then obviously the big issue is security and privacy on that platform, which I think modern technology will provide. I'll talk importantly about Eskom, because Eskom is the elephant in the room, so that's the 8th point, and effectively recapitalizing Eskom so that you take the noose around its neck of the debt off it and allow it to focus on doing its business. And we have specific proposals to make there. 9th, really re-looking at the industrialization architecture, looking at special export zones in South Africa, and what we call destination SEZs. These are SEZs like Dubai, where people work, live, play, school, bring up their families. And if you could imagine Kruger as an example, in Port Elizabeth, beautiful climate, lovely beaches around there, could we create a effectively competitive manufacturing base around the port that could generate employment, and also then lastly, as the 10th point, create effectively a break with the past on spatial apartheid planning. I was an architect by training as a student, and I looked a lot at the township and semi-urban environments, and I think it's very clear, it's very inexpensive, unaffordable for us to maintain an apartheid spatial planning system. We need to densify the urban areas. It's a massive economic opportunity. So when you integrate all of these together, it creates a sense of huge momentum, potential momentum. So we have really two jobs. One is to look after the vulnerable. 2, attack state capture and corruption. And 3, grow the economy.
I would dearly love to literally spend a session on this program dealing with each one of them separately, but let me try as best I can to focus on a few. So let me start with Eskom if I can. I know that your proposal was very imaginative and in relation to the financing, where what you would do, as I understand it, is essentially a lot of the Eskom debt, in any event, is classified as government debt. You'd park that, take it off Eskom's books. We could get the PIC and others investing through equity, etc. And before you know it, you've got an Eskom, as you say, which doesn't have 400-odd billion on its balance sheet, which makes it absolutely impossible. I think that's a terrific proposal, but let me ask you the following. What I found interesting about your proposal with regard to Eskom was, and that's why I wanted to push you on this, was there was nothing about the green economy and the fact that Eskom on its own, to be perfectly honest, it seems to be congenitally incapable, even if we did take the noose off around its neck away, to actually produce the electricity needs of the country as a whole. And for some reason, and perhaps we can talk about it, government has been faffing around about alternative sources of energy for some years. I'd just be interested in your comment on that.
You know, they say you eat an elephant one chunk at a time.
I agree. Fair enough.
So I think I totally agree with your point. it's very important, and I think it's part of Andre de Ruyter, the new CEO of Eskom's plan, which he's been quite public about, to create a renewable and also green financed energy environment in which the transmission company that's ultimately going to be unbundled to its own company accepts energy supply from private and from Eskom supply sources. Those private sources should include the renewables. They should also include potentially selling some of the power stations out of Eskom's, to IPP providers, and having a pluralistic supply of generation into the transmission grid. Now, just one angle on the debt refinancing. Once you've taken all the government guaranteed debt out, and you've done your debt for equity swap, not only with the PRC, I say, but also with others, you end up with roughly 3 times net debt to EBITDA, which is earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, amortization, which is basically the global norm. And you can refinance that deck of debt with green energy financing provided by various multilateral sources, to the extent that you indicate that you're transitioning away from coal purely in your energy supply mix. And so supplying effectively gas-fired power stations, wind, solar into the grid provides a new also source of financing, as well as providing a new source of energy.
Could you do these in parallel? Because it seems to me that I mean, mercifully, you and I are talking without any load shedding at the moment. I mean, it struck me that when you were giving your talk, and which again I cannot emphasize the importance of, it struck me that, you know, all of that was absolutely right, but if you can't actually have a reliable electricity supply, everything else is hopeless. I mean, you simply can't grow the economy, and if 50% of the economy is only operating at the moment, roughly, and we can't even supply electricity then, I mean, you know, frankly, I know you say it's not time to panic, but maybe I'm just neurotic, but I was panicking. So it's possible to do the two together. And I mean, you know,
it is possible to do it together, and I think certainly it's something that the Eskom management and the Department of Public Enterprises, the stakeholder, need to get right on top of, including the energy department. But you know, the fact is that that Eskom is a systemic risk. That's effectively what you're describing. It's a systemic risk for financial reasons, but also operating economic reasons. It needs to get on with it. I have a lot of confidence in Andre as the CEO to do this, but he can't do it alone. His shareholder needs to come and be decisive. So this is Gwede Mantashe, Tito Mboweni, and Pravin Gordhan as the current cabinet ministers sitting on top of this. They need to coordinate and agree a plan.
But can I just be, I mean, can I push you on this? I mean, I accept that. But if you were the president for the moment, would you not get the 3 of them in a room and say, gentlemen, I'm not letting you out of this room until such time as we've actually got an agreement here, so that we can actually implement what Mr. Coleman is suggesting, or something of variation thereof? I mean,
now you're touching on another issue, which is what is stopping South Africa from implementing economic reforms, and why?
Well, I'm going to come back. Okay.
Yeah.
Can I park that? Can I park that for a moment? Then? Thank you, because I agree with that. Because I wanted to get on the second point, the issue of the digital, right? You again, I mean, how much does that have to do with the fact that we've been faffing around with spectrum?
Well, I mean, the spectrum thing touches on our ability to provide an e-government solution. It also touches on our ability to really assist the small and micro enterprises in the country, and for education and other, you know, services to be provided to the poor at reasonable costs online. So, you know, this is again a question of the implementation capacity of the state. Cesar Nkazana, the former Telkom CEO, commented to me some time ago that, you know, this is not a matter of policy. This policy was decided when he was the CEO of Telkom many, many years ago. The question is, why has it not been implemented? And, you know, there are many of these examples that we find that the government is not actually implementing its own policy and is dragging of the heels. This is causing immense lack of confidence but also lack of momentum, which is extremely concerning.
I'm going to come back to this again, but I just want I'd just like to also talk to you, because it's a hobby horse of mine. So you don't have to apologize for this, because I think it's absolutely right. The issue of the spatial geography, and what is particularly interesting to me is that COVID-19 has essentially almost put a focus on that in a way that such a sharp focus that you can't have lockdowns and you can't do the kinds of things that other countries have done, precisely because we've been having people living cheek by jowl in the most parlous of circumstances. Can you just amplify again just a little bit more about what you would do in relation to that, how you would implement fairly speedily radical changes to the spatial geography of our society? Seems to be an utterly vital question.
It's a huge economic opportunity, because that would really marshal the infrastructure resources of the country. Because what you will effectively be doing is reversing the apartheid planning process, which took people out of the city into the far off places or dedicated land. So the government needs to effectively work with the urban planners, with the land owners, and often they're the landowners, with civil society and community representatives, and effectively the mix of professionals and civil society people, and work out plans. But this is now district by district, city by city, as to how do we get these kind of cities that the president spoke of. If you remember, in his State of the Nation, he spoke of smart cities. But this is massive planning and organization. It doesn't come with speeches. It comes with huge marshalling of resources, people, experts, into dedicated conversations around a particular urban area. Let's say the people outside of Randburg, how do we dedicate a whole bunch of land and build, high-rise buildings, where there's a sectional title or various forms of leasing available to people to get into these places and live in a non-racial environment, inside the cities. But this requires massive planning.
Let me give you an example, and that's why I'm so fascinated by this, because I live in a town, Cape Town, where you have literally luminous illustrations of what you're talking about literally every time one drives anywhere. So every time I drive from where I live in Milnerton to the court, I go down the N1, and on the left-hand side as we approach the city is the whole Kulenburg area, a massive area of land where it appears to be nothing has been done about the thing. It could produce a whole area in which urban settlement could take place, so that people wouldn't have to use these hopeless trains to get to work, etc. There is the land that's sitting there, and nothing's happened about it for years. So a question is this a political will? Is it economics? What is preventing us from actually reconstructing that land into something which would change the face of Cape Town in a pretty speedy period?
Honestly, that's a question also to ask the urban planners, the architects, all of those people. But I would imagine it's also lack of imagination, because just think about China, what they've done, and this partly relates to the SEZ. Shenzhen was effectively a small town, 2 hours out of Hong Kong on the mainland, and today it's 10 million people, a modern city. It's got everything you could imagine in that city. It was stimulated by a creation of a special export zone. And so if you have to be very determined, like the Chinese government are determined, to say, we are going to create a city here, and we're going to provide all the infrastructure, the backbone infrastructure, we're going to marshal developers and development into that space, and we're going to create work and manufacturing and technology, and we're going to create residential and living environments here that works. And it's a snowball effect, because that is just kind of the fastest growing. Now, they've done this multiple times in China, and in the process they completely obliterate these old slums that pre-existed, when China was a bicycle country. Now it's this modern machinery. So I think we've got to have the imagination and the commitment and the organization to do this. And it starts with, the political will and the policy that this is what we're going to do.
Can I then ask you, just moving from that, because I'm anxious about time, to talk a little bit about the basic income grant. Now, as I understand it, your proposal would produce roughly, I think you said, taking the $2 a day yardstick. So everybody, a whole targeted group would get over 1,000 rands a month. Is that right?
Correct. It's 140 billion, and you'd effectively get somewhere between 365 rand per month for 32 million adults, 500 rand per month for 23 million adults, or 1,080 rand per month for 10.8 million adults aged between 18 and 59. You're the missing middle between the child grants and the old age grants.
Now, it's obviously become absolutely central as we move, because COVID's not going to end, and we're not going to get our economy running at full bore for a while yet. And the 140 billion, as I understand it, your argument is that we wouldn't have to really raise any further money. You had calculated that through a range of changing the tax structure where certain concessions are given to people, as well as others such as the corruption. I know one of the things that caught my eye there, I'll come back to the tax in a moment. One thing that caught my eye was your focusing on the Auditor General's report and some astonishing figures that we lose through wasteful expenditure. Now, how much, so what I'm asking, I suppose, is all of that's very doable. What struck me with, perhaps let me put three things to you on this. Well, firstly, we'll come back to the essential, what should be done tomorrow morning. The one was that two of the proposals that you heard, I have no problem in principle with them. One was the taking away, I think, of the medical aid credit for taxable income over 300,000 rands a year. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's as I read it.
Correct.
And then savings on the retirement annuity savings for, I think, people over 600,000 rands. I suppose what struck me about that, Colin, was simply this, is that not putting an extraordinary pressure on, particularly the 300,000 one, on people who are not earning very much money? In other words, so asking middle-class people to bear a disproportionate amount of the burden. Lower middle-class people, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah. So, I think that, again, these are provocations that will be tested by experts and the interests of society. But essentially what we're talking about is saving the middle-class life and saving the system of capitalism, which needs to have a human face in South Africa. When you've got 50% unemployment, starvation, and no real prospect. If your listeners, if you're one of these 10.8 million unemployed people, let's just be honest. Do you have any real prospect of getting employment in, let's say, the next year? None at all. So what are you going to do? You've got no income. You're going to do whatever you can, either illegally or legally, to find a source of income to feed your family. So this is now, from a point of view of survival of the system in South Africa, let's call it a social democratic system, essential to now reach out and embrace these people. And, what I've put on the table, these kinds of modifications will, let's say, for example, for those over 300,000 rand of income, losing their medical aid credits may well be a pain to bear. But how much of a pain relative to the pain of a society that blows up, that doesn't sustain because too many people don't have any income, never mind, losing 5 to 10% of the real value of their tax credits.
I would sincerely hope that everybody listening to this, and it seems to be quite a large audience these days, would say amen to everything you said. But here's the point I wanted to ask, was that when I looked at those figures and thought, who bears the burden? the one thing, and maybe it was because you were looking for the least politically controversial set of proposals to get the 140, but I appreciate that. But my job is to ask certain controversial questions. So let me ask this one. You dexterously forgot out of that the public service wage bill. And the truth is, I'm not talking about reducing those wages, but the idea that people should get increases when they're lucky enough to have jobs at this particular point in time seems to me, at the very least, a debatable proposition. And whilst it may well be that a whole range of people, particularly I think of the nurses and the doctors and those on the front lines, the police people, should indeed be rewarded for the extraordinary heroic work that they're doing, there could be some segmentation in relation to that, which would save the government quite a lot of money. And why should that not therefore be saved in order to, as it were, fill up the pot of the money that you're talking about for the very people who don't have the fortune of any job at all?
I think it's a case of not either, it's both. So we need to introduce this basic income grant, introduce these tax reforms. We need to also chase the illegal tax evasion, this 100 billion over and above this 140 billion of savings. And let's not forget, the Treasury is 300 billion rand short on revenue this year. So they are going to already necessarily have to trim that public service wage bill. The public service wage bill is 640 billion. Our interest cost is 240. And the current
You've got nothing else after that, yeah.
It's basically your revenue, 100% of your revenue covered by those three items. So, before you start with police, education, health, and so on. But on the other hand, I think we have to, and I'm someone who's very tough on this, we have to introduce accountability to the public sector. So, education and health outputs relative to investment is very poor. Our investment is in line with emerging markets, our outputs are not. And so we have to have accountability, greater accountability in terms of the salary consumptive expenditure. Contain it, but also get more bang for the buck.
So as we move towards the end of this interview, let me ask you two final questions, one of which we foreshadowed, which is the political question. What is it? I mean, I think some of your proposals are incredibly imaginative. For example, one thing I did not debate with you, which I think is fantastically clever, is the idea that there should be some kind of withholding on people who are lucky enough to get tender contracts, so that effectively the benefits that they get, some of that money is put in a pot and used, as it were, for exactly the kind of constituencies that you're talking about. Those are very imaginative, and hopefully they will be debated and implemented. There are many of them that we've debated with you this afternoon, which whilst you've put them out very clearly, in one or other form have been around and about. And I suppose, and the reason I ask that is because what is it that's holding us back, for goodness sake? Why is it that we can't, to everybody that I talk about this, is I keep on saying, the talk is cheap, money buys the whiskey, and we not got, and we just talk. So, what I suppose I'm saying to you is, if I was in government, I'd be looking at your proposals and saying, let's take 2 or 3 of them now and implement them let's promise to implement them within the next year. The president is speaking tonight on television. Let him take 2 or 3 of your proposals and say, I guarantee you, fellow South Africans, within the next 6 months, these 3 will be up and running. Why can't we do that? What's happening? I mean, you have much more contact with the policymakers than I do. So I'm particularly interested in your reaction to that.
Well, I mean, to the president, I would say, let's get on with this big. October is coming. The COVID 350 Rand grant is coming to an end. Get on with the big. This can be done in a tax neutrally, fiscally neutral way. Let's get on with the Eskom debt repackaging and set them free. And let's get on with this industrialization, replanning of our architecture, because we need investment and we need to reposition South Africa as an alternative to the Chinese supply hub. But I think it really comes down to leadership, Dennis. At the end of the day, if you're the president sitting there, he's obviously got to calculate what his space is and what the political balance of forces are around him for him to take this action. I would say to him, South Africa will back you. And with South Africa backing you, they'll back an ANC that takes these steps. We won't back an ANC that effectively props up state capture, helps formerly corrupt allies of President Zuma that have effectively halved the size of the South African economy. And therefore, you need to get on, fill your team with capable people who have the ability effectively to implement. And if people aren't implementing, you know, we need to move on. We need accountability. Any business that, you know, I've now been in banking and just left that after 25 years, any business would firstly look at what is the makeup of the executive. Are they fit for purpose? Are they going to implement the team, whatever requirements are? We have a Team South Africa requirement, and we have to grow this economy by 5% into 2030 and create 5 million jobs to bring unemployment below the 20% on a narrow band again. And we have to have all hands on deck, because the country without having this is going to drift. You cannot drift with a powder keg of 50% unemployment.
So let me ask you this by way of concluding question, Colin. I mean, you've put up this proposal, but I know as well that you've been very, very influential over, well, in the sense of helping and advising. I'm using the word carefully because obviously what you've been advising has not necessarily always been implemented, to the contrary, and I didn't want to go into that. But what I mean by that, you put up a seriously thoughtful proposal, and you said we shouldn't panic. Are you hopeful? I mean, people need hope. The question is, you know, are you hopeful? Do you think that some of these actually will be implemented, that we are going to get out of this mess?
Well, look, historically we have to. You know, I would just say, Dennis, and you and I are of the similar generation. We may not be the same generation, but we've lived with crisis our whole life in South Africa. I mean, my DNA is every 5 years is going to be a catastrophe. We're near the end of the apocalypse. I've seen the apocalypse in 1994, when Inkatha was taking this country to the brink of violence. We were there. We were actually over the edge, and we somehow recovered. You know, but this situation is extremely worrying, because there's an architecture of weaknesses around the state which prevents action. But we have to get there. So I would just say, you know, I'm always somebody who looks at the reality with a slightly optimistic, glass half full attitude, and that I will maintain.
Well, goodness, we need people like you. And I want to say, just by way of concluding and thanking you, I hope people read your paper. And more than that, I think, you know, let me say thank you for doing it, because what you've put up there, you know, is very much congruent with what our constitutional commitments are. But much more than that, they give us something concrete to debate and therefore to pressurize the powers that be to do what they have to do. And all I can say is that more power to that kind of that initiative. Thank you very much for coming on this program, and thank you very much for what are very, very thoughtful proposals.
Thanks for your kind words.
Yeah, no, thanks, Colin.